At dawn, the wind came down from the hills like breath returning to the body of the earth. It carried dust, dry grass, and the faint smell of oil, the scent of machines that had been working all night. The turbines stretched across the plain, their pale blades sweeping through the mist in wide, slow arcs. They moved in perfect rhythm, indifferent and endless, their hum low and constant. And in the middle of them, standing in the long yellow grass, was a horse. His coat was dark chestnut, his mane tangled with burrs. He stood perfectly still, head slightly bowed, breath turning to steam in the cold. Around him the grass bent under the push of the wind, but he didn't move. The shadows of the blades passed over his body again and again, carving patterns of light and dark across his flank. He blinked once, slowly. The sound of the turbines filled the air, a deep mechanical sigh over and over. The horse listened. He had learned that sound months ago when the men came. They had built the towers one by one, driving deep into the ground until even the earth began to shiver. The horse had watched from the ridge then, not understanding but unwilling to leave. Now they were gone. Only the towers remained. He lowered his head and tore a mouthful of grass from the frozen earth. It tasted of dust and metal. He chewed without hurry, his tail flicking lazily. Somewhere far above, a hawk circled. The air between the blades trembled with the sound of its cry, swallowed almost instantly by the turbine's endless rhythm. When the sun rose higher, the plain turned white with light. The horse walked slowly through the field, the towers stretching around him like thin white giants. Their shadows rotated across the ground, crossing and uncrossing like clock hands. He stopped near the base of one, its metal skin gleaming faintly with frost. He sniffed at it, the smell of heat, grease, wind. It was alive in a way he didn't understand. He pressed his muzzle against it and felt the faint vibration of the spinning blades above. He stepped back and looked up. The blades turned and turned and turned. They caught the sky itself, pulled it into motion. He stood there until the sound began to feel like silence again. By noon, a truck appeared at the edge of the field, a faded white pickup, crawling slowly down the dirt road. It stopped near the gate, its engine cutting through the low hum of the wind farm. A man stepped out. He wore a heavy jacket and a hat pulled low over his eyes. He carried a toolbox in one hand, a thermos in the other. The horse watched him from a distance. The man looked back, squinting against the light. He smiled faintly. "You again." The horse flicked his ears. The man leaned against the hood of his truck, unscrewed the thermos, and poured himself a drink. Steam rose in a soft line. "You're smarter than most," he said. "Always here when it's quiet." He sipped the coffee, eyes wandering over the endless line of turbines. "Never thought I'd miss the noise of engines. These things, they're too polite. They don't roar. They whisper." He finished the cup and set it on the truck's hood. "Guess that's progress, huh?" The horse took a few slow steps closer. The man watched him, unmoving. "You know," the man said, "before they put these up, this was all cattle country. You'd hear the ground creak when they ran." He smiled a little, the kind of smile that had nowhere to go. "Now all I hear's the wind." The horse blinked, his breath steaming. "Still," the man said, "it suits you. Quiet kind of place for a quiet kind of soul." He looked up again at the towers, their blades slicing through the air in slow, unending circles. "You ever think the earth misses being still?" The horse didn't answer. He just lowered his head and began to graze again. The man watched for a while longer, then climbed back into his truck. The engine started, the sound harsh and human. It faded down the road, swallowed by distance and wind. When he was gone, the horse stood alone again among the turbines. The afternoon light shimmered across the metal and the plain. The shadows of the blades stretched long across his back. He lifted his head once more, ears twitching. The world turned around him, the sky, the wind, the towers, but he stayed still. The hum rose and fell like breathing, and for a brief, quiet moment, the horse felt the world stop turning. The sound of the turbines faded. The air stilled. Everything, the sky, the wind, the earth itself, seemed to remember what it was like to hold still. Then, the wind picked up again. The blades began to turn, and the moment passed. The man came back after sundown. The plain had turned to glass beneath the moon, and the turbines blinked red in the distance. One slow heartbeat after another. The wind had changed direction. It carried a dry, electric taste now, and the air felt too light, as if the world had forgotten its own weight. He parked his truck near the central tower and left the headlights on. The light cut through the field in two clean lines, slicing across the grass and the gray steel legs of the turbines. The sound of their blades filled the night. Low, constant, endless. He opened the door, stepped out, and listened. "Still turning," he said. "Good." He grabbed his toolbox and the small radio from the passenger seat. The radio hissed faintly when he turned it on, catching nothing but static. He set it on the hood, adjusted the antenna, and smiled without humor. Figures. Not even the wind wants to talk. The horse was already there. He hadn't heard him come, just turned, and there he was, standing between the shadows of two turbines, his coat dark, his eyes reflecting the headlights. The man exhaled through his nose. "You again." The horse didn't move. The man nodded toward him. "Don't worry, I'm not staying long." He looked up at the blades spinning above. "Just need to tighten a few bolts. They've been groaning all week." He picked up his wrench and started climbing the narrow ladder bolted to the side of the turbine. The metal was cold beneath his gloves. The wind tugged at his jacket, carrying the faint hum of the blades through his bones. Halfway up, he stopped and looked down. The horse was still there, watching. For a moment, the man felt something strange. Not fear, not comfort, but the quiet certainty of being witnessed. He turned back to his work. Inside the nacelle, the air was warmer. The sound of the machinery was a deep vibration, steady and alive. He tightened a few bolts, wiped grease from his hands, and checked the gauges. Everything looked fine. Everything was fine. And yet, beneath the hum of the turbine, he could hear something else. Low, irregular, not mechanical. It came from below, through the steel and the earth. He frowned and tapped the panel. The sound didn't stop. It was like the heartbeat of something buried too deep to name. He turned off the generator for a moment. The blades slowed, whining softly as they lost speed. The field began to quiet. That's when he realized the wind had stopped. Completely. No motion. No sound. The silence pressed against the walls of the turbine like water. He could hear his own breath, the soft pulse in his ears. Then came the other sound. Faint, from far below, carried through the structure itself. A slow creak, followed by another and another, like something shifting in its sleep. The man's throat went dry. He leaned toward the floor panel, pressed his palm flat against the metal. The vibration pulsed once beneath his hand, then stopped. He whispered, "What the hell?" The lights flickered. The control panel blinked twice, then died. He reached for his flashlight, turned it on. The beam cut a narrow tunnel through the dark. The whole tower trembled once, softly, then again, deeper this time. The blades outside had stopped completely now, frozen mid-turn. The man climbed down as fast as he could, his boots clanging against the rungs. When he reached the ground, the air felt strange, heavy, expectant. He looked around. Every turbine in sight had gone still. Not one moved. The red warning lights blinked in silence. And the horse? The horse hadn't moved either. He stood in the same spot, head raised, staring toward the far edge of the field where the turbines met the horizon. The man followed his gaze. The ground there looked wrong. The grass rippled, but there was no wind. It moved in waves, slow and uneven, as if the earth itself were breathing. A deep groan rolled through the soil, up through his boots, into his bones. The man stumbled back. "No," he whispered. "That's not possible." The horse turned his head slightly, just enough for the man to see the faint reflection of the blinking red light in his eyes. The man swallowed. "You knew, didn't you?" The horse blinked slowly. The sound grew louder, a low, dragging vibration that rolled beneath the ground and faded west, toward the ridge. Then it stopped. The wind returned all at once, rushing through the turbines, spinning the blades back to life. The field came alive with motion again. The hum, the rotation, the endless sigh of machines. Everything was as it had been. The man stood there staring at the ground. "It moved," he said quietly. I felt it. The horse took a slow step forward, his breath steaming in the cold. The man looked at him, then at the horizon where the sound had gone. You were here before them, he said softly. You remember. The wind caught his words and carried them away. He picked up his toolbox, turned toward the truck, and didn't look back. The horse watched him leave, then turned his head to the ridge. The turbines turned again, their shadows slicing the earth in rhythm. But beneath it all, deep below, the faintest sound continued, steady and patient. Not the wind, not the machines. Something older. Something waiting. And for a moment, the earth remembered its stillness again. The man didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window of his small rented room on the edge of the plain. The same endless hum of turbines drifting through the glass like static. The coffee beside him went cold. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the strange, hollow certainty that he had heard something alive beneath the ground. At first he tried to tell himself it was just resonance. Wind against the towers, the vibration of stopped blades, the echo of his own heartbeat inside the metal. But each time he closed his eyes, he felt the same deep, slow pulse rise from the earth, the same breath that wasn't his. By dawn, he'd made up his mind. He grabbed his jacket, his tools, and the lantern. The morning was cold and colorless, the sky a thin, unbroken sheet of gray. When he reached the ridge, the turbines were still turning, slow, patient circles against the pale horizon. The wind pushed through them in long sighs. The horse was already there. He stood at the edge of the ridge, his mane lifting in the wind, his shadow stretched long across the frost. The man approached quietly, boots crunching on frozen dirt. You don't sleep either, huh? The horse didn't move. His ears turned slightly toward the sound, then forward again, focused on the ground below the hill. The man followed his gaze. The soil at the base of the ridge looked different today, uneven, as though something had shifted in the night. Patches of grass lay torn from the earth, and fine cracks ran through the surface in jagged, branching lines. He crouched, brushing a gloved hand across the dirt. It was warm. He pulled back. No, that's not right. He reached into his bag, pulled out a small metal probe, and drove it into the ground. The soil yielded easily, too easily. He crouched, holding his breath, listening. At first there was nothing. Then, faintly, a low sound, deep and slow, like pressure building far below. He swallowed. I knew it. The wind picked up again, scattering dry leaves down the slope. The turbines moaned softly, their rhythm now slightly off. One lagging, another catching up. The man set down his lantern, wiped the dirt from his hands, and looked around the field. From here he could see all of it. The white towers stretching toward every direction, their blades cutting through the clouds like patient knives. All of this land had been alive once, cattle, grass, water, insects. But now, only the machines moved. He remembered the old rancher who'd sold it to the company saying, "The ground won't like it. She's old. She remembers things." He hadn't believed him then. Now, as the air trembled around him, he wondered if he should have. He knelt again, pressing his ear to the ground. The soil was warm against his cheek, and beneath that warmth, he heard it. A slow, drawn-out creak, then another, then a sound like a sigh, vast and distant, like wind moving through lungs the size of valleys. He sat back hard, breath shaking. Jesus! The horse took a step closer, hooves sinking slightly into the soft earth. The man looked at him. You hear it too, don't you? The horse's nostrils flared. His eyes reflected the gray light, unreadable, ancient. The man stood, brushed the dirt from his knees, and said, almost to himself, "It's under us." He turned toward his truck, started walking fast. The horse didn't follow. By afternoon, the wind had died completely. The turbines slowed, their blades rotating lazily, almost unwillingly. The air hung still, heavy. The man drove back to the ridge with digging tools, a spade, a pick, a small portable scanner from the maintenance shed. He parked close, cut the engine, and sat for a moment in the sudden quiet. It wasn't silence exactly. It was listening. He stepped out, set up his tools, and began to dig where the cracks ran deepest. The first few inches were soft, damp, strangely warm. The smell of the soil was old, not rot, but the deep scent of something buried for too long. After an hour, the spade hit something solid. He cleared it carefully. The surface beneath wasn't stone. It was smooth, curved, and metallic. Not rusted, not like the turbines, but darker, as though made from a metal that didn't belong here. He brushed it clean with his glove. The surface pulsed faintly, a light so dim it could have been imagined. He stepped back. No way! The horse, standing above the ridge, let out a short sound, not fear, not alarm, but a deep, low breath that matched the rhythm beneath the earth. The man crouched again. What are you? The soil shifted slightly under his boots. The light beneath the surface flickered, red, then white, then red again. Steady, slow, alive. He reached out a hand and pressed his palm flat against it. A vibration ran through him like a pulse. He pulled back, stumbling, breathing hard. Oh, God. The ground rumbled once, deep and resonant. The turbines above him began to turn faster, their blades slicing the air with new force. The man looked around. The whole field seemed to move, not shaking, but breathing. The grass bent in waves that rolled outward from the ridge, as if the land itself was exhaling. He stood frozen, staring as the horse reared, mane whipping through the air. The turbines howled above them, their shadows flickering over the field in frantic motion. Then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. The light faded. The air stilled. The man fell to his knees, gasping. It's alive, he whispered. It's been alive this whole time. The horse stepped forward again, lowering his head toward the ground, his breath slow, calm, ancient. The man looked at him, voice barely audible. You knew. The horse's eyes reflected the gray sky, still endless, patient. And in that silence, the turbines slowed once more. The wind softened and the earth beneath them went still again. Not dead, just waiting. The morning came gray and cold, but the air no longer felt empty. It had a pulse. The man noticed it first in the hum of the turbines. Something was off. The blades were turning, yes, but slower, heavier, their rhythm uncertain. The usual even sigh of wind and metal was broken by small, uneven pauses, as if the machines were hesitating, listening. He drove back to the ridge, the truck bumping over frost-hardened ground. The horizon was a dull silver line, the kind of color that usually promised snow. The horse stood exactly where he had the night before, still as a marker, his breath rolling in pale clouds. The man stopped the truck and killed the engine. The silence that followed was dense. He stepped out, tools in hand, and said quietly, You're here early. The horse flicked his ear, but didn't move. The turbines moaned softly overhead. One of them, farther east, emitted a strange grinding noise, the slow, uncertain scream of gears shifting out of sync. The man walked toward the pit he had dug the previous day. Frost had crept back in overnight, crusting the edges with white, but the soil inside remained dark and soft. He knelt, brushed the surface with his glove, and found the same curved metal shape beneath the dirt. It was cold now, dead. He frowned. Come on, he muttered, setting down his lantern. Don't disappear on me now. He started digging again, this time wider, careful not to strike the buried object too hard. The soil came away easily, too easily, as though it wanted to be moved. The deeper he dug, the more the air began to change. The ground released a faint scent of ozone, rain, and stone, long sealed away from light. After several minutes, his shovel hit something new. Another curve, another surface, connected to the first. He cleared it and realized it wasn't a single piece, but many. Joined segments forming a shape so large he couldn't see its end. He crouched closer. The metal was etched with faint lines like veins or roots branching out into the soil. They glowed faintly, almost imperceptibly, as if light were passing through them from far below. He stared, breath clouding the air. You're not a machine, he whispered. You're part of it. The wind picked up suddenly, sharp enough to sting his face. The turbines creaked, their blades swaying, then slowing all at once, every single one. The sound of the field changed. It wasn't the hum of power or the rush of wind anymore. It was lower, fuller, a vibration that came from below. The horse stepped closer, hooves pressing into the edge of the pit. His nostrils flared, his eyes fixed on the ground. The man looked up at him, voice unsteady. It's waking up, isn't it? The horse didn't move. The wind tore across the plain again, whipping through the towers. One of the turbines groaned and stopped entirely. Another followed, its blades halting mid-turn. The man stood, heart pounding. The silence that followed was immense, an emptiness so thick it almost rang in his ears. Then, beneath it, came the sound. A deep, slow shift. The groan of the earth turning in its sleep. The soil around the pit trembled. Small stones rolled down the slope. The man stumbled back. No, no, no. He looked up at the turbines. One by one, their red lights flickered, faltered, then went dark. The wind didn't stop. It reversed. It moved against the direction of the blades, tearing through the field in short, jagged bursts. The horse reared, mane flying, a sharp, guttural sound escaping him that echoed like thunder. The man shielded his face from the dust. Stop, he shouted, though at what he didn't know. The vibration surged again, rolling outward in waves. The ridge cracked. Lines spread across the ground like lightning, glowing faintly red before fading to black. Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The air stilled. The man dropped to his knees, gasping. The turbines stood motionless, their massive shadows frozen against the dim sky. He could hear his own heartbeat, fast, frantic, and beneath it, something else. A faint, rhythmic beat. Not from the ground now, from inside the buried metal. He crawled back to the pit and leaned over it. The glow had returned, subtle but clear, pulsing once every few seconds, like a slow, ancient breath. He whispered, "You're still alive." The horse lowered his head, exhaling a long, warm breath that drifted over the pit like smoke. For a brief moment, the light beneath the earth pulsed brighter, as if in response. The man stared at it, wonder overtaking fear. "You remember, don't you?" he said softly. "Before the wind, before the towers, before the noise." The horse blinked slowly, his reflection trembling in the faint light. And somewhere beneath them, deeper than any machine or memory, the earth gave a final low sigh, long and steady, like something enormous settling into peace. The turbines creaked once more, their blades twitching, then resumed turning, slower this time, gentler. Their hum rolled across the field like a lullaby. The man sat back, exhausted. "You just wanted to be heard." The horse turned toward the horizon, the wind brushing through his mane. And for a few fragile minutes, the plain was quiet again, truly quiet. The sound of the blades blending with the breath of the land, the living and the built moving together in uneasy harmony. The world turned, but beneath it, the earth, at last, remembered how to breathe,